Hi, this is Mike Hendrickson from OSCON 2017 in Austin, Texas. I'm here with James Ward. James, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. So you're with Salesforce, and you have a really unique and interesting job title. Can you unpack it a little bit for us?
Yeah, so I'm the Engineering and Open Source Ambassador at Salesforce. So that means I get to work with our engineers to help them open source their software and then work with the open source community around that.
Okay, and you gave a talk yesterday, and what was the nature of the talk and what you wanted people to get
Yeah,
from
so
it?
it's called Managing Open Source in Large Organizations. So we're a large organization, and we've had to work through some challenges to be able to participate in open source, both by sending contributions out, by receiving contributions back, open sourcing our projects. So we've had to work through those and create some processes and tools to manage that. So I was talking about how other enterprises can learn from what we learned and do more open source.
So you guys, in your journey to use open source more and to be an open source community giver, have learned some best practices, and you're imparting those best practices on people?
That's right. Yeah. I think we all get better by doing more open source. So
we all do better when we all do better.
That's right.
Yeah. So what are some of the most common challenges you see in a large organization trying to just even get going?
There are a lot of challenges because really what we face is a lot of attacks in various ways. These could be legal attacks, they could be attacks against our infrastructure, they could be PR attacks, and so there's the legal challenges. We want to protect our patent portfolio, we want to make sure that we're not creating an attack surface for patent infringement, those sorts of things. So there's the legal challenges, there's IP challenges in legal, there's quality challenges, making sure that we're not publishing something that's embarrassing, there's security challenges, making sure that we're not publishing something that reveals an attack angle on our software, those sorts of things. So,
and these are all through open source?
Yeah, they really kind of open up the surface area that is out there for what people can see around an organization.
So maybe unpack a little bit for me on this one, because security seems like a main concern for a lot of large organizations.
Yeah.
Wouldn't open source make it better?
It does.
Because more people are plugging the holes that
That's
could be
exactly
there?
Right. Is there's a perception that by open sourcing some code that we're potentially revealing some new attack angles that people aren't aware of. But in reality, what we see is that by revealing that, that things may come about that people are fixing, but now there's eyes on it, and it's more of an open process. So actually, it's better to open source a lot of this stuff, because then we have lots of different security researchers looking at it, reviewing it, and that's why some of the core security pieces of the internet are open source, like the TLS stack and those sorts of things, because then we get lots of different eyes on the software. And so it's kind of counterintuitive, but definitely works in our favor to open source a lot of our software.
And do you also see a cultural shift needed in large organizations to start using open source, especially the large enterprises?
Yeah, definitely. There's a cultural shift in using and in contributing. So in using open source, there's a tendency with a lot of engineers to want to build everything themselves and think that they can do it better than their predecessors, and that's great, and we definitely need that. But oftentimes, if you consume open source and are willing to contribute some changes back, then everything can be made better, and you don't have to start from scratch and fall into all the pitfalls that your predecessors did.
So part of that culture, though, is the mindset of if you contribute back, you're helping potentially your competitors.
Right, yeah.
So how do you get people through that?
They're probably also helping you, though. So it's. I remember a long time ago, I got to be in a meeting with a CEO of Adobe, and right at the outset of the meeting, I was meeting with another CEO. He came in and he said, we're enterprise companies. We definitely compete in certain areas, but we also cooperate in other areas. So let's find the areas that we can cooperate in. And I think that's open source is a good way to look at that. Is there are lots of places where we can cooperate, and there are going to be places where we compete, but ultimately let's find the places where we can work together.
So open source is the nexus of building an ecosystem that works for everyone.
That's right.
That could be great. So what are some of the challenges you think you're going to face in the next year or so with continuing your open source journey and continuing to maximize the benefits from your open source efforts?
Yeah, definitely. So we now have a pretty heavy process that our engineers go through in order to do open source. So this goes through security review, legal review, and then an open source core team review. So many different reviews in order to open source stuff. And so what we're trying to do is optimize that process as much as we can. And as we're optimizing that process, we're using things like the to-do group to share that information and what we're learning, and the to group is sharing with us. And so we're trying to really improve those processes for our engineers and for engineers in every enterprise. So as part of that is improving the process, is automating as much of this as we can. So what we did just a few weeks ago is we open sourced a tool for contributor license agreement management. So contributor license agreements are something that really every open source project should have. Not many do, because it's pretty painful to manage contributor license agreements. So we built a tool that automates. Yeah, nice. Exactly. Nice. So when someone sends a pull request through GitHub to one of our open source projects, we check to see if they signed the CLA. If they haven't, then we ask them to, and this is all automated. So a bot asks them to sign the CLA. They sign the CLA, and now we have record of that, and we update the pull request to say, all right, this pull request is now good, and now they can be a contributor anytime without having to re-sign the CLA. So we automated that part of the process.
So the friction for your developers to actually use and contribute to open source, you want to reduce.
Exactly. Yeah, and on both sides. So both as we're contributing out and as we're receiving contributions back. Yep. Yeah. And so then we open source that contributor license agreement tool as well.
And so what kind of tools internally do you use to help developers know what's happening? Is it Chatter, or what do you guys?
Yeah. Hey, you know Chatter. Awesome. Yeah. So we do use Chatter a lot. So we actually use Salesforce to manage a lot of our process around this. Our engineers are in Salesforce all day long, and so we manage the process for how we actually walk through the legal review and the security review and the open source core team review, and we use Chatter as the communication channel around that. So yeah, it's all, that part of the process is all
your own
based
dog
on
food.
open source. That's right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So what do you see as the main challenges for, let's say, this whole industry of large enterprises knowing that they're in a digital transformation or a continual transformation? What is the biggest challenge for large companies to get themselves on the open source journey?
Yeah. So I think the traditional view from executives is that when you open source something, you're giving up some IP. And we need to try to change that perspective and put value on what is being given away. And one of the ways that we've helped our executives to see that is by doing open source, we create a new avenue for recruiting. Right now, everyone has a hard time hiring engineers, and so we can now go to our executives and say, hey, this really will help us find great engineers, because if someone contributes back to one of our open source projects, guess what? They're a great candidate for working at Salesforce.
And being up to speed quicker as well.
That's right. Yeah. So our executives have been really supportive of these efforts, and that's great. But I think that the traditional view in business is that, no, we need to keep everything, we need to keep all our IP in-house, and so we need to really teach them that there is value in open sourcing software for them.
Augmented IP of the future.
That's right.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thought. So if you and I have this discussion, let's say next year in Portland in July, what would you like to say has changed for your open source ambassador group?
Yeah, so I'm really hoping to develop more automation around this to reduce the friction that it takes our engineers to be able to open source and go through the open source process. Obviously, we can't remove all the safeguards, and we need to keep those in place, but we definitely can do more automated tooling around this. And then I think it would be a good sign of success if we see other enterprises, showing up at OSCON like we have and saying, hey, we are, gung-ho on open source, and we're trying to lead the way there, but hopefully we see others coming along with us as we kind of have blazed the trail and showed them that hey, you can do this too.
Excellent, James. We look forward to that conversation next year.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.